As Eric said, my name's Ramez. I worked at Microsoft for a long time in tech. I teach now at a place called Singularity University on exponential tech in general. But what I'm best known for is my sci-fi. You guys got, I think, one of these in your package today. In my sci-fi novels, sort of near-future thrillers, there's a technology that goes into your brain. It's packed as a drug, but it's sort of nanobots attached to your neurons, and lets men and women communicate wirelessly and send what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling from person to person. Right? So this is probably not a new concept for you, this idea to digitally input and output data from the brain. You're probably aware of this, especially if you follow the latest and greatest in American philosophers, like the great American philosopher Keanu Reeves, who famously, when the computer downloaded data into his brain, said, "I know Kung Fu." What I want to tell you today is that this is sci-fi, but it's rapidly becoming science fact. In fact, we've been working on this for a while. In the 1970s, we invented something called the cochlear implant. This looks like a hearing aid, but it's not. The way that hearing works is that hair cells in your inner ear vibrate to the vibrations in the air that are sound. But some people have no hair cells left in the inner ear. So no matter what you do with sound, you can't restore hearing. A hearing aid picks up sound, cleans it up with a processor, and then broadcasts that cleaned up sound into the ear. That doesn't work. So a cochlear implant looks like a hearing aid. It's got a microphone outside, it's got a little processor. But what it does is it sends the data electrically down that electrode that goes right down into the nervous system to the auditory nerve, sending digital pulses of electricity, stimulating that nerve and sending that data straight into the brain. Now, there's about 30,000 fibers in the auditory nerve, and there's only 23 electrodes in the best cochlear implant. So you wouldn't think it could work, but it does. It produces reasonable hearing that lets people hear words without lip reading, and it has changed the lives of about 200,000 people, like this 5-year-old girl hearing for the first time in her life, or the video you're about to see, which is a 6-month-old boy hearing the first sounds ever in his life.
Here we go, it's coming back on, and he's back on again. See how he turns?
Hi, Jonathan.
Stop the sucking.
Hi.
Yeah.
Could you hear that? Hi, sweetie. Could you hear that? Hi.
So Jonathan there is a cyborg. But he's the cutest damn cyborg you ever saw. And while most science fiction about this idea of upgrading ourselves is sort of scary in some way, it's dark and serious, mine included, this is what the technology is actually being used for, to help people. So we've sent digital data, digital audio into people's brains, 200,000 of them now. We've also sent digital video in. There's a guy named Jens Naumann. Jens is 39 in this picture. At age 18, he worked on a railroad, swinging an axe, breaking rocks. One day his axe penetrates through rocks, hits steel, and a sliver of steel comes up and destroys one eye. 19, he's out snowmobiling, and he has a wreck, and a piece of clutch flies at his face and destroys the other eye. So he's 19 years old, he's completely blind. 20 years pass, and he gets rigged with this system by a doctor named William DeBell. They did it in Portugal, they bypassed the FDA, it was probably unethical in a lot of ways. So what you see here is he's got a CCD camera on his eyeglasses there. It does some processing, it sends data back along that cable, goes to a computer that used to be about this big, now about the size of a quarter. And then from there, the transformed signal is sent up into this jack in the back of Jens's head. Now there's billions of neurons in the visual cortex, not millions, billions, right? There's 256 channels in this data cable. So again, you wouldn't think that with that mismatch you could do much, but it produces what they call limited mobility vision. What's that? Well, here's what that looks like.
I was able to very carefully
drive and look from my left side to my right side, making sure I was between the row of trees on the right and the building on the left. And when I got near any obstruction in the front, I would see that there was an obstruction. I would also see the lack of obstructions. And then when I backed up, I would be able to inspect for obstructions there. It was really a nice feeling.
It was really a nice feeling. So that's a guy who was blind for 20 years, getting digital video in and driving a convertible. Now you'll notice there's nobody else in the car with him. There's no other cars in the parking lot. Jens's vision was not good at all with this system, but it was a quantum step up from 0, and it was proof of concept that something that we thought might be completely impossible, we can actually do. And now with better engineering, we can make the vision better and better. So that's data into the brain. We've also gotten data out of the brain. This is Jan Schurman, studied here at Pitt, and she's been paralyzed due to ALS from the neck down for years. But she has this pedestal, you see it on top of her skull there, about 40 electrodes, and it gives her control of a multi-axis robot arm, right? And it turns out that in these studies, getting a good connection and getting the patient to learn how to use the system depends a lot on motivation. So you can see the motivation here. This grad student is taunting her with a chocolate bar just out of her reach. But you know, motivation's a powerful thing. So Jan is able to do this. So that's data out of the brain to control a cursor on a screen, to control a wheelchair, to control a robot arm. And indeed, we've taken this and made this two-way. The latest versions of arms like this is an arm from DARPA, has feedback of touch back to the person's brain. So they can tell how much pressure they're applying, how hard or soft is the object they're touching, and really sort of complete that circle. So that's data out from the motor cortex. Here's data out from vision. What you're about to see here is two things. On the left are a set of video clips that were played for patients who were inside an fMRI. On the right, a piece of software tries to match the brain scan that it's getting from the MRI machine to a library of fuzzed out video clips that it has. And you can see, as I sit there non-invasively, just looking at their brain activity with an MRI, they don't get a perfect match by any means, but they get something that sort of roughly knows the sort of thing they're looking at. And this is the age of algorithms. So now advances in this area are happening not even through new hardware, but just new software. Advances in the machine learning algorithms behind this have made it accurate enough that if you sit there for a while staring at letters, it can tell what letter of the alphabet you're looking at. So data out. But we are more than just data input and data output machines. We have all this in our life, right? So can we manipulate or improve upon or repair the inner and higher functions that we have? Well, maybe. What movie is this from? Memento, very good. What's the name of the character? Lenny. Guy Pearce plays Lenny here in Memento, and he can't form new long-term memories. Right? He walks in, he can see a room, he can understand it, but he can't lay any of that down. Real cases like this exist, and much milder cases, for people that have damaged a part of their brain called the hippocampus that's vital in encoding memory. So a group of researchers led by a guy named Theodore Berger at USC have created a hippocampus chip. The way it works is they take rats that have damage to this part of the brain, they do a bypass with an array of wires, and they send the data to this hippocampus chip. The chip itself isn't even sort of a top-down design. It's actually just mimicry of the layout of neurons in this part of the brain. Now, when the rats have this damage to the brain, they can't learn new things. You put them in a maze, normally after a first run of the maze, the second run is faster, because they know how to do it. These rats don't have that ability. But when you put in the hippocampus chip, suddenly they're able to learn again, and their performance on tests goes up and up over time, as you'd expect. They also get a new special feature, which is this is digital data. So Berger and his team took a rat, ran it through a maze, recorded all the data that went through this chip, and then a rat lives about 2 to 3 years in the lab, A year later, so 30, 50 years in rat life, they took the rat, played back all the data that had gone through this chip, and then put it in front of the maze again. And the rat ran the maze as if it had just seen it 5 minutes ago. They were able to store the memories and restore them back to the rat, something some of us could use, I'm sure I can. Or other higher functions. These rhesus monkeys, these macaques, have had a chip placed in their prefrontal cortex, the part that's involved in pattern matching and decision making. And then they're trained on a monkey IQ test. It's called a pick and match test. They're shown some images, and then later on they're shown a high-speed blur of images, and they have to pick out just the right ones and not the wrong ones. Okay? And then the chip sits there and it learns the pattern of what does neural activity look like when they get a right answer versus a wrong answer. Okay, great. Then these monkeys have their performance on the test impaired. How is it impaired? It's impaired by giving them large doses of cocaine. So the monkeys think their performance is rising, but in fact it's going down over time. Then the chip gets put into an active mode. In active mode, it sees the pattern of neural firing around it, and if it thinks it's going to produce a wrong answer, it can intervene. And in that mode, it's able to restore all of the deficit produced by the cocaine. In addition, if they do that without impairing a monkey, it boosts their performance to super monkey levels. On a 100-point scale, it gives them a 10-point boost in this test, the first boost of anything resembling intelligence or pattern matching in an animal, and one that's relatively close to us, which of course will lead to the planet of the super intelligent cyborg apes. Well, probably not. All of these things are interesting, but for me, the biggest impact will come, I think, through communication. And I say that because computing used to be about recording artillery tables and then word processing and spreadsheets, and now the #1 thing we use computing for is to talk to each other and one another. And that's how it's changing the world. And we have shown that we can do remarkable things. Here's a study paid for by DARPA, done at Wake Forest University by a guy named Sam Detweiler. They take 2 rhesus monkeys, they put them in separate rooms with soundproofing, but they both have electrodes in their auditory cortex, the part that controls hearing. And when they play a sound for one monkey, the monkey in the other room that's soundproofed can hear the sound and can recognize the sound. This is paid for by DARPA's Advanced Battlefield Communications Grant. So you can imagine the civilian applications as well. Well, here's another study. A guy named Miguel Nicolelis, who's one of the leading lights in this field, did a study where he had 2 rats in identical cages, and the rats had implants both in their motor cortices, the part that controls motion of their paws. The lights in the cage would light up in a certain pattern that would tell the rat, should I pull lever A or lever B? And if it understood the lights right, then it got a treat by pulling the right lever. Except one rat gets trained and learns how to do this with high accuracy. It knows, oh, these lights flash this way, I pull this lever, I get fed. The other rat never gets trained and sits there and has no clue what to do. Until they activate a connection between their 2 brain interfaces. And when that happens, the second rat that has never been trained suddenly starts pulling the right lever. Not all the time, but about 70% of the time. Okay, that's cool. Here's what else is cool. Where are these rats? Well, one is in Miguel Nicolelis' lab at Duke University in North Carolina. The other is thousands of miles away in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in his other lab. Because once you've made this data digital, you can send it anywhere you can send digital data. Or these guys, University of Washington, about a mile from my home, Rajesh Rao and Anders here, they're playing a video game. But they're not playing it in head-to-head mode, and they're not playing it in cooperative mode. They're playing as single player. And what happens is that the guy on the left can see the screen, but has no keyboard or mouse. He just has this skull cap with EEG sensors. The guy on the right can't see the screen, but he has the controller. And when Rajesh Rao on the left thinks we should shoot now, he thinks shoot. And that is transmitted across campus about a mile away, and the magnetic stimulator on top of Andrea Stoko's head here stimulates a current through part of his brain that controls his right index finger, and his finger twitches. It's not that the fellow on the right thinks, oh, Rajesh wants me to shoot now. No, he just observes his finger firing. right? His hand has been given over in control in some way to another person. We've done this time and again, and now with animals as well. Humans can control the body parts of sedated animals. Or at USC, Ted Berger and his team have now started talking about what happens if they have two rats with a hippocampus chip inside of them, and they connect them. They have one rat run the maze, and the other rat doesn't. When they put the second rat in the maze, what will happen? They haven't done this experiment yet, but will the second rat know how to run the maze? Will it have the sort of rat equivalent of I know Kung Fu? Maybe. I'll bet something like that will happen, actually. All of that said, there are some hurdles to this. There are some serious challenges. Who's excited about voluntary brain surgery? Raising your hand counts as consent. This makes people less excited typically. This is what a modern probe looks like. You don't want that sort of jammed into your brain tissue. Now you can see the scale here. I'm exaggerating for effect, right? This is what it actually looks like. Even so, you don't really want sharp, pointy things, even this small, being slid into your brain. And in fact, the very area they're listening to or stimulating is the area that they're potentially causing bleeding and so on. That said, we used to think that eye surgery would never happen, right? Voluntary eye surgery. Because taking a scalpel to someone's eye, that's crazy. You'd only do it if you absolutely had to. But the excimer laser changed that. An advance in technology took us from 20,000 eye surgeries a year at a cost of tens of thousands of dollars to more than 2 million eye surgeries a year, almost all of them elective, at a cost of a few $100s. Right? So is there a LASIK for the brain? Maybe not quite that far, but there are some good things happening, especially if you're a zebrafish. Did any of you hear about the Breakthrough Awards a few days ago? $3 million given to a bunch of different scientists. One of them is a guy named Ed Boyden, and Ed invented a technique called optogenetics, where you can genetically engineer neurons to pulse light when they fire or to be controlled by light. You can then use lasers to make them switch on, off, etc. Well, using that technique and others, a team of scientists led by Ahrens and Keller did this. What you're looking at here is the brain of a zebrafish. This zebrafish is in a virtual reality environment. It's underwater, sort of pinned in place, and there are screens showing it food, predators, mates, and by genetically engineering its neurons and then scanning them at high speed with a laser, they're able to see every single time a neuron in the zebrafish brain fires. Now, zebrafish, this will provide excellent insights into neuroscience in general, but zebrafish have a couple advantages over humans. One, we think it's ethically okay to genetically engineer their neurons, which so far we're a little dicey about with humans. So far, we'll see. Second, until they're full-grown adults, their skulls are transparent. Right? So that's an advantage they have that you and I don't have. That said, there's other stuff happening that looks pretty interesting. At DARPA, my friend Phil Alvelda leads a team that is trying to take us from brain interfaces that can touch 100 or 200 neurons at a time to interfaces that can touch more than 1 million neurons at a time. And more bandwidth will mean higher resolution, more precision, more insight into how the brain works, right? And they're targeting areas all across the brain for all different kinds of applications, really to help wounded soldiers on this Veterans Day. The number one application of this is soldiers that have come back with some sort of brain trauma, helping to repair that or replace that function in some way. At Penn, this is a conformal interface. What is this? This is electrodes on a biodegradable silk substrate. They do have to make an incision in the brain or in the skull, but then they spread out this silk substrate across the brain, and it doesn't have anything hard and pokey. It simply melts into the brain, and in fact, they can make it fully biodegradable so that after a year, it has just been absorbed by your body and taken care of. Or just a few months ago, Harvard, the Charles Lieber lab, had this study. This is not an artist's conception, this is an actual photograph with something called a neural mesh. What you see on the right is the tip of a very fine syringe. That's how small this is. And they have, in mouse brains, they have taken a syringe, pushed it through the skull, which still is somewhat invasive, but less invasive than removing a large part of the skull, and injected this mesh. And then the mesh unrolls over time inside the brain and gives them high fidelity contact with thousands of neurons. And next step is to do this in humans. Now, there could be other problems, of course. How many of you want to see this inside your brain? I don't. Or a malware warning, or a pop-up or pop-under ads to enlarge certain body parts, or just cookies. So there's reasons to be concerned about having an awful lot of technology inside of our own skulls that's connected to us so intimately. But for a moment, let's imagine that we can overcome some of these barriers. What would happen? What would be the consequences if we succeed in the technology? Well, to look at that, let's look by analogy at a couple other pieces of technology that are really about communication, from the mobile phone to the printing press, right? These had a massive impact on society in multiple ways. This is a book by Isaac Newton, Principia Mathematica. This is a book where he published his idea of calculus. Why could he do this? He could do this because the printing press had been around for more than a century, and he had read hundreds of other books by other people publishing their ideas. And he served as, he's a great innovator, but he was also sort of a remixing chamber. He could take all those ideas, put them back together, put out his own new ideas that advanced the field, and then publish that to thousands of people and now billions of people in some way. And so the benefit to society of the printing press was this ability for ideas to collide. Idea sex is what Matt Ridley calls it, and have little baby ideas that then go on to benefit us. And that connects to something called Metcalfe's law, right? You all know this. We talk a lot about Moore's law. We don't talk as much about Metcalfe's law, that the value of the network is n squared with the number of people in it. As you connect more people, as you make that fidelity of connection better, you get more and more value, you get more and more innovation, whether that's via digital tech, the printing press, or stuff in your brain. Now that, of course, assumes that this issue of inequality isn't a big blocker. If we build technology like this, will only the rich be able to afford it? That's a common trope in sci-fi, a little dystopia. Only the super wealthy can have this, and they deviate out, they speciate out from the rest of us. Well, I think again it's worth looking at some analogies. Remember this movie? Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, greed is good. Well, here's Gordon Gekko's cell phone. This is a Motorola Dynatac. It cost $4,000. It held a charge for about 30 minutes, not talk time, just 30 minutes. And it took 12 hours to charge, right? There were also no cell towers, so the reception was crap. This phone costs $40, right? This is the face of digital technology today, is a poor farmer in Bangladesh who can afford digital tech that connects him to all of the world's information. The early adopters pay through the nose for a worse technology, and then they fund the R&D that makes it cheaper and better for the world. So now there's more mobile phones in Africa than the US or Europe. And in India, by the end of 2017, we'll have more smartphones than there are human beings in North America, right? This, rather than the digital divide, this has been a digital leveler. And so we're all becoming already sort of cyborgs. In fact, this is a cognitive upgrade to all of us. So when we think about those two things, the upgrade of the individual and the increased ability to communicate, what we're looking at is a world of smarter, more connected people, which means more innovation, more growth for all of us, right? Whether it's cell phones or brain technology or literacy. The other area of concern isn't about economics. It's about surveillance and the power of the state, right? Again, in sci-fi, when we talk about communications technology, we tend to get very dystopian. We tend to think about Big Brother in 1984. And there are reasons to worry about everything from the NSA to hackers to states that manipulate the media, like Russia. But again, if we look at the trajectory here, the printing press took literacy that previously had been in the 0.001%'s hands and levelized it, made it available to everyone. And that had powerful impacts, not just in innovation. It let the first newspapers be created which was a turning point in the evolution of what eventually became democracy. It let crazy people like this guy, John Locke, write this booklet that said, hey, if we're not the same, maybe we should still get along, which was a radical idea at that time, and something you would never have seen coming from the top down, but came from the bottom up. That in turn led to the very idea of civil liberties and the foundation of our society. Even today, we see that the ability to communicate drives forward social evolution. You look at Black Lives Matter. It turns out that police started being worse to black people when Twitter was invented. Right? That's not true. We all know that. When we look at this, it's easy to get depressed by bleak things we see in the news. But what's happening is that problems have always been there, and now the ability to communicate about it and to broadcast is helping drive evolution and change in those areas. Even in places that work hard to restrict the ability to communicate, China here, we see massive change that the state has been unable to control. These are protesters in a Chinese city called Dalian. Dalian's about 2 hours from Beijing, multi-million person city. Most of us have probably never heard of it. They're protesting against a new chemical factory in town that they believe will be highly polluting. And they won. They stopped that factory from being built. And in fact, there have been thousands of protests in China over environmental issues, smog, chemical plants, factories, water quality, that have, in dozens of cases, stopped projects or enacted change. You see China now acting to reduce smog. It's because they have no choice but to listen to their people. And that is facilitated almost entirely, organized almost entirely, via mobile internet. In fact, I have some funny stories about how this works and how the state tries to subvert it, if you find me later. And when we come back to the US, as opposed to this dystopian idea that more ability to communicate will somehow lead to homogenization and state control, we see that it lets us see more people as human beings. And it has enlarged our scope of what we think is acceptable and who we think should have a seat at the table. You know, I live in Washington State, and like Colorado, we passed marijuana legalization in 2012. I thought, this is sci-fi. We don't have flying cars, but something has changed that most people did not anticipate because of the social impact of the ability to communicate. In fact, I look back and I think every step forward in civil rights and civil liberties has been driven in part by new media and new ways to communicate. Technology has allowed us to see people we previously didn't see. It's allowed us to hear voices that previously weren't heard. It's allowed our sense of empathy to expand to encompass more people. It's allowed us to see out of the eyes of others. Right? That's been a metaphor up until now. Increasingly, it's real, whether it's video taken by a cell phone or perhaps eventually seeing directly out of someone else's eyes. So that's why I'm optimistic that whether we get neural interfaces or not, the trajectory of technology is both towards more innovation as we connect, and I think towards more compassion as well. All right, thank you very much. I'll be around all day.
Thank you, Ramez. Ramez will be around. We were chatting in the